Hi, this is Joseph Cook. Welcome to part 6 of the series Freedom Through Travel, the Mediterranean. This is the part of the trip where I lived La Vida Dulce, the sweet life. There's certainly nothing modest about the way the people live here. I always found it ironic that once you went into a church in Italy, you had to dress so modestly. There's no shorts. You had to wear pants for sure. And this is also the part of the trip where I began to speak with my hands. Very expressive. I remember one time I was at a hotel and I was trying to explain to the woman there at the hotel who managed it that I was staying that night, this was in Venice, and the next day I would be going to Slovenia and returning the day after that at night at about 11 o'clock. That's just the way the trains went. And she told me that it closed at 11 o'clock. And she wanted to pay me for both nights, but I wanted an assurance that I could get in that second night because I'd be there late. So this led to a big argument, and finally she knocked on the wall, and her daughter came out who spoke a little bit better English, and that worked for a few seconds, but then all three of us began to argue about really nothing. We all took a time out, then we talked again, and started a little bit of an argument. I pulled out my necklace with the crucifix, which was a good thing here because of the Roman Catholic Church. She kind of melted a little bit, and we made an arrangement that I'd pay, but she gave me her number just in case I would get locked out, and everything turned out okay. The first place I stopped in is the French Riviera and Cannes. This is the place where they have the film festival every year. It's fairly famous. They also have a series of really nice beaches. I was then on to Nice, and Nice was very nice. Sorry about that, but Nice was a very nice place to be. It had, again, really nice beaches. The clothing is a little bit more liberal view on what you can wear on a beach. Also some huge yachts and a square called Messina Square. This was built in 1832, and this is really the focal point of Nice. And from there I went to the ancient cathedral, Our Lady of Chateau, located on a hill over the city, and that allows good views of the old city and the Bay of Angels. The next place I went to was Monaco. This really became more important. This is actually its own country. Starting in 1863, it really spurted up in 1863, and gambling became legal here. And then in 1868, there was a train that connected it to Nice, and then finally in 1869, the next year, they lowered taxes quite a bit, so that's when it really became a more popular place to be. The Monaco Villa is where the Prince's Palace is. It's a combination of Italian artwork and a Moorish tower. The ruler has been there since the 13th century, and Prince Rainier III presently stays there and does allow for visits at the end of summer. Also, the cathedral is there. This is built largely from profits from gambling, and it's also where Grace Kelly is buried. She died here in 1982. It was buried here in 1982 in a fairly basic grave. For me, I couldn't really go gambling. I didn't have the clothes or the money to go gambling. It was then on to Milan, and the fortress here was built in 14th century. This was both a defensive fortress and barracks. It's now a museum. Also, the 15th century Church of Santa Maria holds the Last Supper, which is probably one of the most famous paintings in the world. Upon entering the area where the paintings are, it's actually a large hall, and the Last Supper is on your right, and it's a fairly dark hall, but this painting's been restored 8 times, and actually it's not in quite as good a shape as the other painting within the church, but the painting takes up basically a whole side of a wall. And finally, the cathedral in Milan was built in 1386. This is a huge cathedral. It's 12,000 square meters, 325,000 tons. It has 3,400 figures on it, and a 4-meter gold leaf statue of the Virgin Mary, along its tallest spire. Milan is also famous for its high fashion, and you did get to see those shops as you walked around Milan. That goes on to Venice. And the first thing I visited in Venice was San Marco Square. From 1096, the cathedral was built here after, with the relics of St. Mark inside. One of the other highlights of the square is the pigeons. There's probably more pigeons than people in this location, and it's kind of like the Hitchcock movie. It's a bit scary actually after a while. It's actually built on a low level, so it does get flooded every once in a while, this square. Speaking of water, you can go on a gondola ride. I didn't do that. I decided to walk. It actually, I thought, was a better option walking. You could see all the canals and walk along the confusing streets. The streets are very confusing if you do get lost, but it's a pleasant walk. Ljubljana in Slovenia was the next place I visited, and I started with the castle. This castle is first mentioned in the Middle Ages at the time of the knights. Became a fortress, and now there's restoration work being done to it. Leaving the castle, you can walk down to the old town along the Dragon's Bridge. The dragon is an important part of the city. It's a symbol of the city, and it's also on the coat of arms. I continued throughout the city, went through the National Museum, the downtown area. The city has about 330,000 people, so it's nice size. It's not too big, but it's not too small. There's also an Old Town Market, and I went past the university, which actually has 35,000 students. It's more of a university town. In fact, it was built in 1917, and it was the only university in Slovenia until 20 years ago. And then to the main downtown area where there's the three bridges. There's kind of an interesting story to this. There was originally one bridge built in 1280, and in 1895 there's an earthquake, and at this time Slovenia was being ruled by Austria, and they told the Austrians that the bridge had been destroyed, this earthquake, and it actually hadn't. But with that extra money that they were giving to restore it, they built two more bridges, so now it has three bridges. And this is located right next to Prešeren Square. This is an important square. It's the first time that the national flag has been raised was in this square. And it's also near the Franciscan Church, which was built in 1646, which is really stands out on the square. And there's also a post office really nearby, which is huge. It's one of the most impressive looking post offices I've ever seen. Slovenia is really a hidden gem. Not many people have heard of it, maybe even, but it's really an attractive place to be. But I did leave Slovenia and went back into Italy and went to Florence. And what dominates Florence is the Duma. This took 2 centuries to build, and the facade on it is pink, white, and green. And the dome on the top makes this building the tallest building in the city. You can also walk up the tower and look over the city and look over the square and see the baptistry. The baptistry is highlighted by the bronze doors on the outside, and the most impressive is the Gates of Paradise door, which faces the Duma. Inside the baptistry, you can look at the ceiling and see the gory 13th century mosaics of the Last Judgment. Moving along, I traveled to the Piazza del Signoria. This was the political and social hub of Florence, and now is home to many famous sculptures, included David, which is in front of the old town hall. There's also a really impressive art museum that I didn't visit on this day. I visited the next day. I'll describe that a little bit more in a short while. Nearby is the bridge from the 14th century. It was one of the ones that survived World War II, one of the very few that survived World War II. And what makes this neat is that there's merchant shops actually built right into the bridge, and they still survive to this day. You can walk on the bridge and visit the merchants. And crossing the bridge, I went to the Pisa Palace, which house has a massive art collection. Next day I traveled to Pisa. Of course, most people will go here for the Leaning Tower of Pisa. There's actually a square where this is located, and there's 4 buildings in total. The cathedral, the baptistry, and the cemetery. And also there's a wall. The the cemetery is actually located outside the wall, as was tradition for that time. The tower itself is the bell tower, correlated with the cathedral. It was built in 1173, and they say that there was actually an incline already during construction. There's many, they've tried many ways of stabilizing it. Right now they're working with the subsoil and trying to remove some of that to stabilize it. And unfortunately I couldn't go up the tower because of this project. There are other things to see in Pisa, including the Knights Square. This was the ancient center of Pisa, and there are several buildings in here, university buildings and churches. St. Stephen Church, built in 1569. Walking back towards the railroad station, I saw one of the fortresses along the river, which is another site. Then I did return to Florence to the art museum that I had mentioned before, built in 1581. This has a huge collection of works from the 14th through the 18th century. And the next day, I then went to Sicily, and after seeing the Leaning Tower of Pisa, I heard about 2 other towers that did fall down. This was September 11th. So it was a bit of a shock when I did arrive in Sicily on September 11th to hear stories on CNN. I was surprised and saddened. But I don't think it probably affected me as much as many other people. I had the opportunity. I was overseas. I felt fairly fortunate to be overseas because I could really think about the situation rationally and know that the chance of me getting hijacked is the same as me getting hit by lightning twice, and that there's a far better chance that I die because of cancer or even a car crash or somebody just killing me, a murder case. So I decided to go on. I did meet a lot of people that wanted to go home, but I really didn't see a need for it. One of the interesting parts of this was I was the only American at the hostel that I was staying at, and it was interesting to get the impression of other people about America. It seems like President Bush is thought more highly in America than the rest of the world. I think the general consensus among others was that he's not a intellectual house. They often told me the story of him thinking the Taliban was a rock and roll group when he was running for president. I think maybe he got confused with Steely Dan. And also that he wasn't able to identify large parts of Europe on the map. So, like I said, he's thought of quite a bit different, and it's really interesting to get the view of other people about America. Cantanea, though, is the second biggest city in Sicily, and the reason I went there was to see Mount Etna. Mount Etna was not erupting at this time. Unfortunately, I missed the volcanic lava. We did walk on Mount Etna, though, and it's a tough walk because the rocks, it's kind of a slippery surface, and if you fall, you're going to get scratched pretty good. And if you fall the wrong place, it is hot in some places if you're grabbing for a rock. We did put a piece of paper down on the ground, and it did burn. So there are hot spots there yet. It's just no lava. And at the base, it's 36 by 24 miles, and the oldest lava there is 30,000 from 30,000 years ago. One of the best areas in Cantanea, this part of Sicily, I guess, is where I imagine Joey Buttafuoco came from. It's kind of a little bit rough. But the best part is that I like is the park. It's away from the people and the traffic, and I spent a lot of time there. There's also a historic building close by, the Omni, and again, they have a Duma Square also, a cathedral dating back to 1092, and kind of a cute elephant fountain in the middle of the square. Close by is the San Giuliano church. What I noticed, especially in Italy, it seemed like there's weddings almost every day. It's something that struck me. I saw weddings a lot. This brings us to the freedom tip for today. That's going to church. I know my parents were excited when I told them that I was going to church 3 or 4 times a week on this trip. But I think it's good to go to church. And when I'm talking church, I'm talking about other religions too, not just Roman Catholic Church. It's a way to free yourself here in America. There's a lot of misconceptions about religions and different cultures. And religion really does play a huge role in cultures. It's pretty amazing. And besides seeing these buildings, which are really impressive, some of them are amazing to just look at, also learning about these religions, I think will make you a much more intelligent person. Returning to the trip, I then went to Palermo. Palermo is right on the sea. It's the #1 city of Sicily. And I did check out the sea area. There's not much of a beach here, but I went through the market area too, which is dominated by fish market. This is really smelly, but it's interesting to walk through. I also went to the Opera House, which is actually the 3rd largest in Europe. It could hold some 1,400 people. My favorite part of Palermo was San Giovanni. This was built in 1136, and you can really see the Arabic theme, but it's a combination church and mosque with a rectangular mosque and a porch and a courtyard in this area. There is also another big cathedral here, built in the 12th century. There's been numerous additions since then. The front is joined to the bell tower by 2 arches, which makes for a really attractive entrance point. Then it was on to Rome. The Colosseum is the first thing I visited. This was built in 72 AD. It's some 160 feet high, and there's 80 different entrances. And there's some 50,000 spectators that could sit in the Colosseum. There's gladiator fights, mock naval battles, and animal fights inside the Colosseum. Included slaves, prisoners, and volunteers. This is something I wouldn't volunteer for. There were some 10,000 people that died until 404 AD when the gladiator fights ended. They fought animals for a couple more centuries. Close by is the Forum. The Forum is actually was an area drained in 600 BC, and then several political buildings that became a political center of Rome. And Caesar's really built this up. You can see some buildings, the Senate buildings and such, in this area. The Trevi Fountain, built in 1751, is a popular tourist attraction. It shows the Palace of Neptune, several other figures, including horses. And the tradition is to throw three coins with your back towards the Trevi Fountain, throw it over your back, and the water's supposed to carry it to Neptune, and it's supposed to signify that you will return to Rome, which is your dream. And another popular spot for both Italians and tourists is the Spanish Stairs. This was built in 1717, and the idea behind these stairs was to connect 3 different arteries of the city. Next is on to the Sistine Chapel. It's kind of odd because you're walking in, and you think you're in the Sistine Chapel, but you just keep walking and walking and walking. It's just the museums until you actually get to the Sistine Chapel. And Michelangelo did his paintings here in 1512. The one on the ceiling, of course, is the most famous, which is Creation. And it's kind of funny, you walk in, and there's security there telling you to keep walking, let other people in. And then you kind of sit up, or you kind of stare at the ceiling, and it's kind of funny watching everybody else. Everyone's got kind of a sore neck after a while, but you just kind of keep staring at it because it's such an impressive painting to see. Then I went to St. Peter's, the most famous church probably in Roman Catholicism. He was buried here in 313. The Emperor Constantine set forward this church, and 1,000 years later was chosen by the Vatican as the center of Roman Catholicism. Close by is one more about St. Peter's. There's also a section that has a sculpture of the Virgin Mary and Jesus, and actually it's behind glass because there was a Hungarian who attacked it, but it's still okay now. But close by is the Papal Fortress. This was built in 6th century, and it was linked by an underground passage. And the Vatican City, actually, this is also technically its own country, and it's the only place I went to where a papal blessing was a souvenir. You could buy a blessing if you wanted. Back to Rome, there's several piazzas. All of them, everyone I went to was very attractive as far as the sculptures and as far as the people watching. The next area I went to was south and west of the main area, the Colosseum and the Forum. And it's a little bit less touristy. I did see some signs, anti-terrorism signs, saying Italy supports America and the fight against terrorism. And there was people that kind of talked to you because you're American and said they were sorry, which was nice. But also in this area is the San Giovanni, which is the Cathedral of Rome, built in the 4th century. This is, again, Constantine built this, and its present form took place in the 12th century. It's some 130 meters high, and the Holy Door is open for Jubilees. Then I was on to Greece, and I stopped in Patras for one day. The castle here was built in the 6th century and used until World War II. Another place I enjoyed to look at in Patras was the Ancient Theater. This is actually still used for summer theatrical performances. Then on to Athens. And of course, the number one thing to see here is the Parthenon. This was built 447 BC, almost all of marble. And there's 8 columns on the front side and 17 on the side, the opposite side. So it's 8, 17, 8, 17 for the rectangular form. In the center stood a statue of Athena. There's also, it's on top of Acropolis Hill, so there's actually several buildings that you could look at. And these buildings were a combination of a cult place and then maybe a residential place, or both throughout the centuries. Another place I enjoyed in Athens is King's Garden, again, to get away from all the traffic and all the people. This is really relaxing. This was the private garden of the king at one time. Now it's open to all. But in 1920, King Alexander was bitten by a monkey and died here. There's several plants and trees that were brought in, as well as a zoo. I left Greece and moved to Istanbul and the Topkapi Palace, which was the Ottoman Empire's palace, which lasted from the 15th to the 19th century. First thing I visited was the harem. The harem was built between 1574 and 95 and could hold 474 people. They took us through all the rooms, including the Imperial Hall, which was really impressive to look at because of its intricate design. They even took us through the bathrooms. They were quite proud of the fact that they had some of these inventions, like running water, long before the Europeans did, even though most people think that the Europeans were farther along. Also went through the courtyard of the favorites located just outside the harem. This is the balcony area. There's actually like 3 or 4 different gardens that you can go through, sections of this palace. Another place I went inside the palace grounds was a sacred safekeeping room. This is a very interesting place. It has the footprint, the hair, the beard hair, the tooth, 2 swords, and the cloak of Muhammad. The other building that's important is the Imperial Treasury. This has, I guess, the equivalent of the royal crowns in England. It has their crowns, and it also has the hand of St. John the Baptist. Then I was on to Sofia. This is a very impressive city, very close to the palace. This was a church for 916 years, a mosque for 481, and has been a museum since 1935. Across from the Sofia is the Blue Mosque. Now this was caused quite a debate because when it was built with 6 minarets, and the only other place mosque that had 6 was the one in Mecca. So it was almost like this Sultan was trying to upstage the one in Mecca, so it caused a little bit of a debate. But it took 7 years to build. It was built in the 17th century, and the Sultan himself helped build it at the end, but he died soon after it was completed. And the name comes from the blue stenciled interior, and you do have to wear proper clothes. They do give you something to cover either your legs or your head if it needs to be covered. Then it was on to the Grand Bazaar. This was the oldest and biggest closed bazaar in the world. It covers some 60 streets, and you can buy a lot of different things here. You can buy ethnic goods, things like Genie in the Bottle, some clothing like that. There's a ton of things to buy at this palace or bazaar, and I did buy quite a bit here. Then I went to the Princess Islands. The Princess Islands are actually 9 islands, but there's only 4 that are inhabited. And this was an area that when the princes were disgraced, they went here. They left. It's just south of Istanbul. And there's actually no motorized vehicles here. You have to take a horse-drawn carriage, but it's a really pleasant place to be. I then went through the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. This has some classic artifacts from Troy, Cyprus, and Palestine. And then one really odd place that I enjoyed was it's called the Sunken Cistern. This was a cistern in times of siege or drought that kept water so that people wouldn't, go thirsty. We did get to the end of it. We didn't quite get to the Black Sea because that's when the boat stops. But again, another overview part of Istanbul is at the Hippodrome, which is where the chariot races were and the center of Byzantine civic life. Not much remains now. There's only 3 columns left. The oldest one is an obelisk from 1547 BC. But that was my trip through the Mediterranean. And next I headed on to India and Nepal, South Asia, which is part 7 of the series.
Geçmiş güzel günler